سڵاوتان لەبێت عزیزان ئێوارەی هەموو لایەک باش هیوادارم زۆر باش و لەش ساغ بن لە زەنجیرە لایڤێکی تری قاوەیەک و چارەسەر گەڕامەوە لاتان زنجیرە لایڤی ئەم جارە لەگەڵ دکتۆر کارمێلایە و بابەتەکەش باس لە performing art, culture and language لایڤەکە بە زمانی ئینگلیزی دەبێت چونکە دکتۆر کارمێلا خۆی دانیشتووی ئەمریکایە بەڵام دڵنیام کە سوودێکتان پێدەگات و ئەگەر ئینگلیزیکی لاوازیش بزانن ئەمە ئەبێت بە هۆکارێک پاڵنەرێک بۆی دەست بکەن بەوەی کە وردە وردە خۆتان فێر بکەن زۆر سپاس بۆ ئێوە زۆر سپاس بۆ بەشداریکردنتان بۆ ئەوەی کە کاتی خۆتان نەبەخشن و لەم لایڤانەیە لەگەڵما بن پاڵپشتیتان هاندەرێکی زۆر بەهێزە بۆ من و وام لێ کات کە هەمیشە هەوڵی باشترین بدەم کەسانی زۆر باش بێنم بۆ ئەوەی کە زۆرترین سوود بگێنم بە هەموو لایەک و هیوادارم سوودەکەش گەشت بێت من چاوەڕێی دکتۆر کارمێلاکەم پێم وابێت لە دەنگا هیچ کێشەیەک نییە ئەگەر کێشەیەکیش هەبوو تکایە ئاگادارم کەنەوە بۆی پێشوەختە بتوانم ئیشی لەسەر بکەم وەکو دیارە وەکو جارەکانی پێشووتر لە لایڤەکەیە کە لایڤەکە دەسی پێکرد کۆمنتەکان دەکوژێنمەوە بۆی کە بتوانین زۆرترین سوود بگەین. Hello, Dr. Carmela. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm so good. Thank you so much. And thank you for giving us this time and this chance and this opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, much appreciated. And I'm sure that those people here, maybe, I'm sure by the end of this live, they will get lots of benefit and they will love English and they will run to buy books and learn English.
That's fantastic.
Thank you so much for being part of this live, which is a series of live with different people from different countries. I named it, I wrote it in Kurdish, sorry, that above part in Kurdish what means a cup of coffee and a solution. So I do live with different people from different countries to provide solutions for those problems that our society or community they face it regarding language, regarding culture, awareness, motivation, and different things. Okay, so are you ready to go on the live?
Absolutely.
Cool. Thank you so much. And well, I will close the comment so people can just see you without popping up comments on each other. And if they have any question, they can put it into the question. There is a question bar there. They can just put any question there, and by the end of like 10 minutes before the end, I will ask you those questions that the people asking me.
Okay.
Cool.
Well, Elsie, I mean, I probably won't have, I probably won't need to speak for the whole time. So if you, I actually invite questions throughout, if that's possible, because, I can, of course, speak about my work, but I don't need to talk about it for a long time.
Yeah, for sure. I will ask you different questions based on my experience, but by the end, I will ask you those questions which it came from the participants. So before we move to the topic, I would like you to introduce yourself, if you don't mind, because many people, they don't know you. Almost all of them, they don't know you.
Absolutely, absolutely. So welcome, everyone. I am Dr. Carmelo Romano Gillette. I am a lecturer at the University of Michigan in the United States. I have been working with learners of English for almost 30 years now. That makes me feel very old to say. Maybe I should say 27 years. Does that sound better?
Still young. Still young.
But yeah, so I have a master's degree in applied linguistics, and my focus was on teaching English. And then I have a PhD in literacy education. And again, my focus was on um, mostly on reading languages outside of one's native or home language. Um, but I also, to me, literacy means sort of everything to do with language. And so I thought a lot about the different ways that we use language when I was working on my PhD, and worked on some different projects involving digital literacy and and the effects of speaking English and writing, and especially listening to English and reading. So yeah, so I'm interested in lots of different aspects of
Cool.
language. But
So, sorry.
no, go ahead.
Um, have you ever been a teacher, or have you ever taught EFL or ESL students or learners, like English as
Yes,
a
so
foreign
yes.
or is it English as a second language?
Yes, absolutely. So I spent at the start of my career, I worked with, so I lived in a place in the United States where there were lots of immigrants from Mexico. And so I worked with a lot of people, mostly adults, who were coming to the United States to live and who needed to learn basic English. And then I also, at the same time, was working at a small college in the area. And so working with students who were learning academic English. And that's sort of been my career, is that I've worked with students who are learning academic English or students who are learning, you know, sort of that survival English. And now at this point in my career, I work more with teachers, but some of my teachers are so at the university, they are PhD students who have come to the university to do their PhDs, but part of their funding requires them to teach. So they might be teaching physics or chemistry or statistics, but they have to do this in English with English speaking students. And so I work with them to help them work on their communication skills for that process. So that's a lot of fun for me because I get to do both the language stuff and the teaching stuff.
I see. When it comes to English, many people, they feel like super shy and super worried because based on our education system, it's mostly to do with grammar. And you know, when it comes to grammar, many people, they make mistakes. When they make mistakes, they feel shy and embarrassed and red faced, stuff like this. That's why today we come to talk about the language in three perspectives, like language, culture, and performing art. If I start to ask by saying, what is performing art? Like, what does it mean to you?
Well, to me, so I can give you two different answers to that question because I would give you, you know, a general definition to say that performing art is any sort of artistic endeavor that a person performs for others to view. So, for example, acting on a stage or singing a song or doing a dance, right? So anything like that that is a very performative in nature, that you know usually has an audience to it. For me, because I didn't talk about my bachelor's degree, in my bachelor's degree, I actually studied theater and I studied acting. And so for me personally, when I think of performing arts, my focus is always on acting because that was something that I studied. But I also, you know, I also was involved in some musical theater, so I had to do some singing and dancing as well. Um, but yeah, for me, performing is really about acting, which I think lends itself really well to mixing with studying English.
Cool. So we know now what is performing art. Then we move to the second key topic or key point, which is culture. Um, how performing art is related to culture, or if I say uh, different cultures, do they have a different performing arts, or there is a basic rule for all the cultures?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think, again, if we look at that sort of general definition of performing arts being anything sort of artistic that is performed for an audience, then we could say pretty much every culture embraces some form of that. But from culture to culture, you definitely see differences and how that happens. So there's lots of, sort of traditional performing arts. So I think of, for example, in Japan, the kabuki theater, which is, the ancient theater from Japan that is very specific to their culture and tradition. And that, I can watch and enjoy, but I don't experience it the same way as I would if I were someone who participated in that culture. And then what we also see as an outsider, then, I can watch the performing arts from other cultures and come to understand things about that culture in that process. So if I saw a demonstration a few years ago on the Peking opera out of China, which is again a traditional art in China, but is still practiced very much today. And by watching that performance, and then it was so lovely because the actors then demonstrated for us and explained why they did things the way that they did and the way that the audience is meant to interact with the opera theater. And so I learned a lot about that culture while also just enjoying the art itself.
Actually, you are talking about the soup opera, right? They call
The,
it soup opera, if I'm not mistaken, because when I was in China, they called it soup opera.
yes.
Yeah. So the soup opera is the main aim behind this is to hide the gender, to hide the females from males, and just put the mask on their face to see how people think from inside rather than from the facial expressions. Cool.
Mm-hmm.
So, based on your knowledge, how can we get benefit from performing art and culture to improve our language? I mean, our language as English, because English is our foreign language or second language.
Right. So I have been, for years now, I have been using some of the techniques that I learned when I was training as an actor with my students in my English language classroom. And I think that there are sort of two sides to that, right? So you can watch, say, an episode from an American television show and analyze the language that is happening and the cultural practices that you see happening in that show and learn a great deal from that. On the other side of that, I also ask my students to pull maybe, 2 or 3 minutes or 5 minutes of a scene out of that television show and memorize it and learn it for themselves and then perform it as well. And so beyond just learning the language and studying what's happening, you're also using the language to perform. And you have to really understand what's happening in the scene, what's happening in the show to do it well. And through that process, you really do come to know that language quite well.
Cool. Do we need to learn the culture before the language, or we need to learn the language first and then learn about that culture?
I would say neither of those. I would say it happens at the same time, right?
I mean,
So
alternatively,
simultaneously.
or
Yeah, because I think too, culture is such a dynamic, meaning it's always changing and complicated and complex thing, that I think it's impossible to really understand the depth of culture. But I think what happens is the more that you study the language and the culture, the more you understand about each one, and then both of them together, because they really go hand in hand. So if you think about, for example, in some languages, there are words that have no translation in other languages because they are so culturally situated. That's something that, so for example, in my second language, which is Italian, there is a word simpatico. And to try to explain to someone what that word means in English is almost impossible because I have to use so many different words to talk about what that means. But it comes from a very cultural place. It comes from a very, the Italians are the kind of people that they are, that simpatico is about, it describes a relationship that you have with someone, that you feel very close to that person and you like that person very much, but it's not like any other kind of relationship. You know, it's not like the relationship that you might have with your spouse or with your child or something like that. It's a different kind of relationship. So it's a very difficult one to describe.
So, for example, when I came to America, I didn't face a lot of problems with my English, but I faced problems because of the cultural differences. That's what I'm saying about culture and language. If we don't know the culture, American culture or any other society's culture, even if we know the language, don't you think that we will face problems?
Oh,
Like, for
absolutely.
example, in my culture, male genders can kiss each other, but we don't kiss the opposite gender. However, in your society or in your culture is completely different and the way around. So
Exactly.
that's why I asked you that. Don't you think that we should learn a little bit about the culture before we go in deep into the language?
Oh, absolutely. And I would say, I mean, if you're talking about the learning process, I
Yeah,
would say that they happen simultaneously. But if you're talking about if you're going to immerse yourself in the culture, then yes, you better learn some background about that culture before you do that. Um, because you will find there will be lots of mistakes, but also frustrations that you might have or misunderstandings that will happen. And it will be easier for you if you know some, especially the basic, you know, so you know, we have this objective culture and subjective culture, right? So objective
yeah,
culture are things that are really easy to observe. So for example, if you look at the ways that people, when they are in public, especially in crowded spaces, the ways that people will wait to do something. So like in the United States, waiting in a line or a queue is you know, very, very common. But in other countries, that's not the case. So if you were in the US and you were from a country where everyone just goes straight to where they're going, people would be angry with you, right? Because you're supposed to wait at the back of the queue.
yeah.
Um, so those are the kinds of things, those very objective, very visible kinds of things that you definitely do want to learn a bit about before you go to participate in that culture, for sure. But I think it will take a long, long time to really understand the culture. And I think by studying both the language and the culture at the same time is how you really get to know them both well.
Cool. So if I ask you something quite different from these, which is about fluency, um,
Sure.
can performing arts and cultures, movies, dramas, series, those things can they help us to improve our fluency? I mean, language fluency?
Yeah, I would say for as far as the teaching approach that I have developed with my colleague, who is a professor of theater, um, we actually call our approach performing fluency, and that's our website, performing fluency, because we believe that that first and foremost, that is the biggest benefit you can get from using this teaching approach when it comes to English language or any language really. um, because the activities that we do require you to speak spontaneously and fluently. So we start small, of course. So we play little improv games, if you know what improv is, so that you only have to say, you know, a few things, and you become more comfortable with speaking spontaneously, and then we add more on. We also have students, you know, memorize scripts and act out scenes because again, this is a way to, if you ever studied reading fluency, in reading fluency we read and we repeat and we read and we repeat and eventually our fluency gets better in reading. It's the same for speaking. If I study something, I memorize something, I repeat it, I try it a couple of different ways multiple times, then I become more fluent and then I can take pieces of that, expressions, words, vocabulary from that, and use it in my, you know, spontaneous speech outside of the classroom, and that helps me to build fluency.
Cool. Sometimes when we teach English, the students are afraid that they make mistakes not only through the language, but also to the opponent. Um, if you can tell them that when we make a mistake, I mean, regarding behaviors and tradition or culture, not regarding the language, we do something which in your culture is not welcomed. Uh, what would be your, how can I say, how can you react to that?
So I would say that one thing I will say about American people is they tend to be very generous if they understand why you did something. So I teach my students right away to say, I'm sorry, I'm not from here. And in my country, this is the way we do it. Can you tell me the way you do it here? And I find that they will get so much help that way. Sometimes they make friends that way, because people are then very interested because they love to be helpful. And then they're also very interested in where are you from? And oh, that's so interesting that you do this way, right? So yeah, so that's one of the things I teach my students right away, to just be, don't be embarrassed, don't get angry or upset about making the mistake, but then ask someone to help you, and I promise people will always want to help.
Cool. So if I may ask you that, how can you make friends? I mean, if many times students ask me that, how can you make friends with people? I said in England, they usually talk about weather. Really, they start with weather. Like it's a sunny day, rainy day. This is the way that they open the conversation. What about American culture? How do you
Yeah,
open
I would
the
say
conversation?
that's very similar. So we call that small talk, right?
Okay, yeah.
So small talk are those kinds of topics that you can be sure no one will be angry or offended that you talk about, and weather, of course, is one of those. So in fact, I was just this morning, I had to go an appointment for my eye doctor, and everyone was talking about how much it's been raining here and how the humidity, right? And so because nobody really knew each other, but that was the way we became comfortable speaking with each other. So, those kind of topics usually are, sports. Um, so, for example, I just got very excited about the Euro Cup this year. So I'm talking to everyone about how my Italian team won the Euro Cup
Okay.
this year, right?
So
So,
apart from American football and basketball and I think it is baseball, what are the
baseball.
other topics that American people usually they open the conversation with?
So weather and sports are big. So especially like I'm on a university campus, so a lot of times people will say, "Oh, did you see the game?" And they're talking
Ah,
about, whatever our college team played. So that's a big one. Weather, food is a big one too.
mhm.
So, oh, do you know a good restaurant that sells this? Or do you know a good place to go for lunch? Like that's another one that will be a good opening for conversation. Um, Complimenting is a big one too. So oftentimes you will see someone and maybe you like their shoes or you like their hat or something like that. And so you say to them, "Oh, I just have to tell you, I think that your shoes are so lovely." And that might start a conversation. So yeah, that's a big one too. But it usually, yeah, so it's usually those kinds of very simple, um, non-controversial topics that will start the conversation. And then once you have the conversation started, often what happens is people will ask questions because it's it's nice to show an interest in someone else. Of course, we have to be careful about the kinds of questions we ask, but if we ask, sort of simple questions like, "Oh, do you like this?" or "Are you from here?" or that kind of thing, like things again that won't be offensive or controversial, then that's how you get to know people even a little bit better.
So, do you recommend that foreign students, when they move or they come to your country for study, for any other purposes like work or study or travel, do you recommend them that the students should know, or the people should know about the do's and the don'ts before they start to talk to people?
Yeah, I think that they should have some good ideas about things like topics that they shouldn't ask. Um, You know, for example, I always have new students who will ask me my age. And in the United States, that you're not supposed to ask, especially a woman her age. I don't mind because I'm used to it. But I will always tell them, okay, I'll tell you my age, but just so you know in the future, that's not a good question to ask, right? So that's like those kinds of things are good to know. But like I said, I like to always tell my students the best thing you can say is, you know, I'm new in your country and I'm studying the culture and I'm wondering if I could ask you a question about something. And then people will always want to be helpful and that will get the conversation going.
Well, in China, it's completely the opposite. To show the friendliest attitude, they start with asking your age before asking your name.
I know. I have lots
Yeah,
of students from China who
yeah,
always want to
because
know my age.
when I went there, like they said, okay, where do you live? What is your religion? And how old are you? All the taboo questions. But yeah, it's a part of the culture. So
Right.
if we take culture, like how can we uh, how can we practice performing art, or how can we practice culture in order to improve our language? Is there a way to practice them?
Culture is a hard one, but I will say um, I often give students the assignment to find a television show or a movie that they like and to watch it with the subtitles on so that they can get the meaning from it, and then watch it with the English subtitles on so they can catch a lot of the language, and watch it again and again. And that's, like I said, is a way to sort of build fluency. But then you want to have a resource available to you for the culture piece of it. So if you have a teacher that you can ask questions to, if you have, sometimes there are fan websites where you can ask questions. So for example, when Game of Thrones, for example, was a very important television show in the US for a while, right? So there were all of these websites with chat rooms where people could talk about what was happening in each episode. You know, Facebook pages about Game of Thrones, right? So you can go to those and say, hey, I'm not familiar with, you know, this. Can someone answer? And lots of people will want to answer you. So you have to find your resources, but once you do, you can get lots of really great answers to questions. But if you watch it first, it will bring up the topic.
Ah, okay, I see. So can we perform, I mean, at home by ourselves to
Oh,
improve our language? To like
oh, absolutely.
perform as an actor or an actress?
Oh, absolutely. I would say, you know, again, this is another assignment that I give to my students all the time, where, like I said, we watch a television show, we pull out a scene, you know, maybe 5 minutes of it, we practice it. And then what I have students do is videotape themselves performing the scene and then watch their video. And they hate it because everyone hates to watch themselves on video. Um, but it's really, really helpful for them because when they think that they are being, um, you know, that they are doing lots of expression, and then they watch themselves and they see that they're not, you know, that they're being very quiet or they're being, you know, because in the US, again, you know, you can see I'm doing a lot of this gesturing, right? So that's very much like how we talk. Um, so when they watch themselves, they realize they're not doing those things. And then they can reflect on that and then think about how they can do more of it, videotape themselves again, watch themselves again. So it becomes a self-reflecting kind of activity. Um, and it really does help to build all of those skills.
Okay. According to your experience as a teacher and as an American person, do you think that grammar and accent uh, make you American people difficult to understand us?
I think it can, but I think that there is a spectrum, right? So on one side, we have an accent that is so heavy or grammar that is so different from the standard that it becomes very difficult, right? And then on this side we have, I mean, I don't know if there is perfect, right? There's no such thing as perfect, right? Because there are so many different American accents and so many different English accents. But I think if you can get yourself moving from this place to this place, then that's a good thing. I would never, I would never say to anyone that their goal should be to speak like a native speaker. Because, first of all, like I said, there are so many different kinds of native speakers with so many different kinds of accents, it would be impossible to say which one, right? But also, I think, you know, your accent is part of who you are, and it makes you interesting and unique. So, as long as people can understand you, as long as you can speak it well enough for people to understand you, I think that's what's important. So, yeah, sometimes, you know, if you use the wrong verb tense and you meant to speak about the future, but you used a past tense, that can be a little confusing, but we can clear that up in the conversation. Um, if you're saying a word in a way that makes it really difficult for people to understand, then try another word and see if you can get it that way. Fluency and intonation are much more important than things like the sounds of vowels, for example, because we can figure that out.
So with the least grammar, but with the most vocabulary, as far as you understand, you will not
Yeah.
give the corrections. Cool. Well, many people, they have, I mean, in my culture or in my society, they have a problem with subtitles. They say when we watch a series or drama or movie or any American films, or usually for the action ones, not the romance, because they speak slower, but when they speak fast and they cannot reach the subtitle, so in the middle of it, they get lost. What would be a kind of suggestions or recommendation or solution for this?
Well, I guess it depends on how you're watching it, first of all. Because if you know, if you have the video or even if you're watching YouTube, you can control the rate, right? You can control how fast it goes. So if you can slow it down, that will help you. But again, I'm going to go back to repetition. So use the first time you see something, use all of the tools at your disposal. Use the subtitles in your home language so you can get the meaning. Then watch it again with the subtitles in English so you can match up the English with what you're hearing. Then try watching it again without the subtitles. So that repetition, I think, is going to be the key. So it has to be something you like that you're going to want to watch more than once. But if you do that repetition, then you can catch a lot of it. If you have the control and you can stop and go back, I mean, I do that all the time, even when I'm just watching Netflix, you know, and something happens and I didn't catch it, I go back all the time. I think that that's okay, because if it helps you to understand, then that's, you know, what you need to do. Now, of course, if you're watching it in a movie theater or something like that where you don't have control over it, that will make it a little bit more difficult. But again, I think you would just have to go back and watch it again and see how much you could catch the second time.
When it comes to performing arts, do you mean only series, or it could be also movies or songs?
Oh, absolutely, anything. I mean, music videos. So, because music, when watching people sing, is really helpful for intonation patterns. So I always recommend music videos as well. My colleague who teaches pronunciation uses music videos. She has her students lip sync, you know, sing along to the music video as a way to sort of practice making those motions for the pronunciation. But yes, I would say anything. I used to take my classes back when I was teaching with the theater professor. We would take our classes to the plays and we would watch live theater. So I would say any sort of performance is a way to especially examine the culture and then definitely experience the language.
Is it based on individual work, or because sometimes people, students usually, they nag and complain. They say, we study drama, but we just memorize the scenes. We study poetry, but we just memorize the analysis, or we take it from the internet and then we will answer. There is no performance in the school, at university. Do you think we can do these based on individual works, like independently?
For sure. Yeah, see, I would say that performance is the most important piece. So I know that there are lots of people who just do, I'm trying to think of the name of that technique, but it's always based on analysis of scripts. Process drama, that's what it's called. Which I think is good, but I think it leaves out the performance piece. And to me, that's the most important part, because you really have to know it to be able to perform it. I would say, yeah, you could certainly do that on your own. You can, the thing about doing it on your own is that you get to choose the things that you're interested in. And I think that that's really, really important. That if it's a TV show or a movie that you really want to understand, you are going to be motivated to do the work to understand it. So if you can choose what it is you're watching or listening to, then I think that that's going to be really helpful for you.
Okay, what about listening without watching? Do you think that listening can help us? Like listening to the podcast, listening to VOA, or just download some tracks without any movement?
Absolutely. Yeah, I recommend podcasts to my students all the time, because most podcasts are conversations, like this one we're having right now, for example. And so they're a really good way to examine how people participate in conversations. So what kind of language do they use to interrupt? What kind of language do they use to take their turn, to respond to someone? To acknowledge what someone just said, right? And a lot of times there are podcasts in lots and lots of different topics. So for my students, for example, who are studying in the STEM fields, they will watch podcasts or listen to podcasts about science topics that they know that they will eventually need to talk about themselves because their research is related to it. And it gives them lots of good examples of how to talk about those topics.
Okay. Maybe sometimes some students may ask, like, how do we know or how do we learn about different or American culture? Is there a way to learn without moving to that country, without or before going to that country?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you would have to use multiple resources to do that. There are definitely books that have been written about American culture. There is a really great essay that I asked you to read for our workshop, and now I can't. The author's name is Kohl, Kohl. And I'm trying to think of the title of that essay, and I don't have it near me right at the moment. But it's about the American values. And so it gives a really nice outline of the basic American values. And then what I would say, you could take that essay and then see how those values are demonstrated in a television show or, a movie or something like that you watch.
Can we get it with free PDF online or?
Yes, it's available in multiple sources, so you just have to Google it. And I'm sorry I don't have it right in front of me.
It's not a big problem, because later we can write it in the comment of this live. I will post this live into my Instagram, and I will post it on YouTube also. So
perfect.
And people can listen back to it and can take it from your voice and just Google it. Mm-hmm. So I may ask you if there is a chance to learn the language without knowing anything about performing art or culture. Is there a way?
I think you certainly can. You can study the vocabulary, you can study the grammar, you can, I'm trying to think of an example of, because I think of once you want to interact with anything, any sort of, watching a movie, or even even like I think about my graduate students, my PhD students who read scholarly articles on, in physics journals, for example, they still have to have some understanding of the culture of physics, for example, to be able to understand everything that's being written in that article. So maybe you don't have to study all aspects of culture or in great depth, but I think it's impossible to study a language without understanding some of the culture underneath it.
Can we take it from the literature, not performing art? I mean, by literature, like novel, drama.
I think you can. I mean, like, so for example, that essay that I was just talking about, you can read that essay and it will give you lots of good information about um, what Americans believe and why they do some of the things that they do, but it's going to be very general. And it's going to be, what's the word I'm looking for? Almost like a stereotype.
Okay, I see.
If you really want to understand how it happens in, a situation, I think the best place to find that are in the performing arts, because the performing arts is reflecting the lives of people and how we interact and how we practice our culture.
Okay, do you have any example like for performing arts? It could be a series, it could be a drama, it could be movie. Do you have any suggestions that our people can listen to it, which is not very difficult? It's like they can understand, or at least they can know what it's talking about to understand your culture more.
Mm-hmm. Um, Gosh, that would be hard to just give you one or two examples because,
You
again,
can give me anything you like. It's just up to you.
so I know what's very popular around the world is the television show Friends,
Yeah.
because that looks specifically at a particular time in an American person's life when they are old enough to live away from their families that they were born into, but they have not begun their own families. So they're not married yet, but they are past university age. And so lots of Americans, not all, but lots of them at that point will go and live maybe with a friend or by themselves, and they will experience life in a way that's very different from being part of the family they were born into and then being part of the family that they end up having once they get married and have their own children. And so that is a very sort of specific point in an American person's life where you can see lots of things happening that are very typical for the United States. Now, it's already getting kind of old, that show, but it's still, even though, because I think it finished maybe more than 20 years ago, but it still does contain a lot of interesting information about that point, that particular point in a young American person's life. Some that are a little bit more contemporary, gosh, but again, a lot of them are so specific. There's like Modern Family is one that's very, very popular.
Usually, what are those drama series that American people they watch it?
Yeah, there was a drama series, Parenthood, is that what it was called? That was about multi-generational families. That would be a very good one to see. And then there was another one that we watched recently in my class called Prison Break.
Oh yeah,
And that was
by
a really
Michael.
interesting look at the prison system in the United States. So again, like it depends on the kind of topics that you're interested in. Lots of people like the Big Bang Theory because that was about academics, although I would say it misrepresents American academics very much.
Okay, I see. Usually because of technology, people are looking for the quickest, easiest, and fastest. I'm sorry I ask you this question, but they bombard me with these kind of questions when I give them private tutoring or homeschooling or even at university students, they ask me that, What is the fastest, the quickest, the easiest way to learn English?
My students ask me that all the time.
Is there something
And
like that?
oh, and I have to tell them there isn't one. There isn't a fast way. Um, I think you can learn a lot of vocabulary by memorizing it. You can learn about culture by examining the performing arts. You can get better at speaking by speaking a lot. But it's the kind of thing, it's like any sort of skill, like playing the piano or playing a sport, that you start off learning the basics and then you have to just keep building on those basics. And so you can get pretty good after, a few months of study if you really immerse yourself in the study of it. But you have to just continue for a long time, unfortunately, I think, to get very good at it. It's something you have to do for a number of years to become really good at it.
Sorry, I think there is a problem with your voice.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, cool. Well, I had a friend. He took a course. I even said that before. He took a course. After 2 weeks, he left the course. I told him why you left the course. He said, for 2 weeks, I'm trying and I couldn't speak just like you do. I said, I'm trying English since 1998 and I have PhD in English. So if you think that English is so easy, why should I bother myself all these years? If I may ask you, shall we start from the grammar or vocabulary or the skills as a beginner, as a learner?
As a beginner, I think you should learn some basic grammar, but I think vocabulary is key. It's really difficult to learn anything else about the language if you don't have some of the necessary vocabulary. Um, and I'm trying to think of the name of they keep changing the name of it, but it's the general usage vocabulary list that was published a number of years ago.
Is it a book?
Do you know the academic word list? Do you know that vocabulary list?
I use the phrase banks and the word list, which is from the England, Manchester phrase bank and other things. But I think we have also Collins. If I'm not mistaken, Collins is from America, right? Yeah. Collins also, they have a word list. So you recommend a basic grammar plus a bit of vocabulary and then move to the skills.
Yeah. Then you start building on it for sure.
So
because it's just really hard to do much without the vocabulary. You can certainly try communicating with some very simple things, but vocabulary is really important.
So, but sometimes we see in the movies or in the series or drama, they don't fully follow grammar or grammatical rules. Because we have academic language and we have slang language. So sometimes people, like foreign learners, they get disappointed. They try so hard on grammar and then they watch a movie, they hardly understand something. Like, for example, it was like 15 years ago, something like that, I read William Faulkner, American novelist. He doesn't follow any grammatical rule. And I said, oh my gosh, I'm learning what for all these years? What did I do in grammar? So when it comes to that performing arts, and when we look at the academic English or academic American English, that there are changes, there are differences. How can we fix that problem?
Well, I think, first of all, there is the academic English and then there's the sort of everyday English.
Yeah.
But there's also a lot of space in between that. So if you look at, at my university, there were some researchers who put together, they taped many lectures And what they saw was, so these were very academic spaces. And what they saw was this mix of the kind of conversational language with slang and idiom in it, along with the academic language. And so that, of course, is what makes it really, really difficult for a learner, because as you said, you tend to study the academic language, and then suddenly you have to interact with people who are using slang or idiom or a mix of it, right? So it all comes down to what your purpose is, what your goal is. So if you want to study at a university where English is the main language, then you do have to learn that academic English. But if your goal is to communicate with English speakers, then you are going to have to learn that slang and that more informal language as well. And so that's where the performing arts can be really helpful, because it is a lot of examples of those commonly used informal kinds of language. Yeah.
So based on that statement, can we learn the language without having a native friend? I mean, a friend like face-to-face or social media friend, or
I think you can learn.
can we still master the language?
I mean, I guess it depends on what your definition of mastering the language is, right? So again, I would go back to goals. So if your goal is to just be able to read academic texts, then you can certainly do that without ever interacting with anyone, right? But if you really want to be able to communicate in language, you have to communicate. You have to act.
So to understand the culture better, you should have a native friend.
Absolutely.
Without that, there is no way.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I really do think, because you have to have that resource. You have to have someone that you can ask a lot of questions to.
Okay, such a disappointed one for those people whom they don't have foreign friends, I mean native friends. But based on culture, is it easy to make friends, like native friends?
I think if you are living within the culture, it's much more possible, of course. And you have to, sort of do the things that we talked about at the beginning, right? Start some small talk and ask a lot of questions and let people know that you're trying to learn about the culture. And then I think, you can get there. When you're not living within the culture, that certainly can be more difficult. But again, I would offer up, those online spaces that, like Facebook groups or chat rooms or things like that, where you can meet people who have similar interests to you, and have conversations, and learn more about them. And again, ask a lot of questions and people will definitely want to answer them.
Cool. So we are almost about to come to the end of the live. Thank you so much, Doctor, for giving us this opportunity, this chance, fruitful knowledge, all these ideas which we can gather it from many, many books, but you gave us within like less than 1 hour. I do really appreciate for giving us the time and the chance and the effort and the knowledge. What is your last recommendation, suggestion, anything about performing art, culture, and language?
My recommendation would be to challenge yourself. Oh, I feel like my connection or yours, but we're getting unstable. So I always say challenge yourself.
Michael, yeah. Sorry.
You have to practice to learn the language. So you have to make time to practice. And so, one challenge I will give to my students is to say to them, choose an hour of each day when you will only use English. No, no any other language, just English. And it's just an hour of the day. The rest of the day you can do whatever you want. But for that, and so you have to challenge yourself. You have to force yourself to do it. Arts works so well because it gives you so many different opportunities and ways to practice by watching and listening and then performing yourself.
So an hour every day and you will be better by the end of the month.
Yes. And
That's
ask a lot of questions. Be curious. Ask questions.
the problem is, I always tell them that if you keep asking, you will be spoiled. Like, don't be spoon feed. We spoon feed our students. Whenever they don't search, actually. The other day, one of my followers sent me a message and he asked me a word. I told him that you can go and check the dictionary. Why you ask me? Why you take my time for a word? Since you have a dictionary near you. That's the problem. What kind of questions we ask? We should ask those questions which we cannot take it easily.
Yeah, I think that that's an excellent point. We should ask a lot of questions, but we should also be willing to find our own answer questions. So build your resources. Find spaces where you can, like a dictionary or, an online space where you can find the answers to those questions. We have an expression in the United States, Google is your friend. You can search for anything on Google.
The best friend. Actually, is the best friend. Thank you so much, Doctor, for lovely night for us and a lovely morning for you. I really do appreciate I know you have a lot of work. You left a lot of meetings and works aside just to give us this opportunity. I do really appreciate. I'm sorry for taking your time and for giving us.
It's absolutely.
Above all, the language. Thank you so much. Pleasure all mine. And I don't like to take further of your time. I will, after this, I will post it into my Instagram and I will post it into the YouTube. So I will open the comments. I think I asked you all the questions and there is nothing left. But if there would be any, I would ask you. But I think there is no more questions because you answered all the questions. Thank you so much, Doctor, and wish you a very pleasant day and enjoy the rest of your week and weekend.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. I really enjoyed speaking with you. I always enjoy speaking to any student, anyone who's interested.
Thank you so much. It is such a great honor and such a great pleasure. Wish you a very lovely day. At the top of your video, you can see in the right side, there is a cross. You can just hit that cross. And if you don't have anything else with us, you can just give us your last goodbye or farewell.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this a lot, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you again.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. زۆر سپاس عزیزان دەستان خۆش بە کە تا ئێستا ماونەتەوە هیوادارم کە سوودێکی کەمیش بێت سوودتان وەرگرتە بێت ئەم لایڤانە بەردەوام دەبێت لەگەڵ کەسانی ترە و لە یوتیوبەکەم و لە ئینستاگرامەکەشم بەردەست دەبێت هیوادارم ئەگەر سوودێکی کەمیش بێت گیان دەبێتم پێشتر لایڤەکان بە زمانی کوردی بوو لەگەڵ ئەو کەسانی کە بە زمانی کوردی پێشکەشیانە کرد ئێستا لایڤەکان لەگەڵ ئەو پارێزانەی کە لە ئینگلیز با بڵین لە وڵاتانی ترەوەیە بە ئینگلیزی ئەکرێت کەواتە this is your time, this is your chance. Challenge yourself. If there is a will, there is a win. Remember, you can always win if you have a desire, if you have a dream. لەشتان ساغ بێت و شەوی هەموو لایڤتان ئارام و شاد بێت تاوەکو بابەتێکی تری قاوەیەک و چارەسەر لایڤێکی تر بە ئەمانەتی خوایە